where technology is built from the ground up. And with the power of Predix from the inside out. Where world records are shattered. Where factories are built in months instead of years. And jet engine technology leaps forward. Where homes around the world are powered. A simpler, more focused digital industrial company, which creates new business and industrial leading expertise. With more developers and partners than ever before. We're reimagining industry for today and tomorrow.
So good morning, everyone. GE is a company that's in the middle of reinventing itself. It's transforming from a 125-year-old manufacturing company into a digital industrial company, a company that brings together the world of the physical with the world of the digital. Why are we doing this? To prepare for the next wave of industrialization, the Internet of Things that Federico talked about yesterday. GE is doing this in a company of nearly 300,000 people around the world, in a range of businesses that cover everything from trains through to wind turbines, aircraft engines, medical sensors, and smart lighting systems. So this is an enormous transformation that the company is on a journey through at the moment. And what I'm going to talk about today is a case study from within GE, an example where we have successfully transformed the organization, the culture, and embraced a new digital way of working within global operations. This is GE's shared services organization. So what I'm going to do is take you through a short case study, talk about what we did, some of the lessons that we learned. I'm not going to talk about technology. What I'm going to talk about is the process that we went through to deliver successful change. And I'm hoping that, in doing so, you'll be able to, draw some parallels, take some lessons that hopefully you can apply in your own businesses. So, just a bit about global operations. So, this is, as I said, it's GE's multifunctional shared service. It's around 9,000 people in 85 countries around the world. Most of them are within one of 4 centres. The rest are located out with our operating businesses. So this organisation serves all of the GE businesses, as you would expect a shared service organisation to do. What I'm going to do is talk about a case study from within what we call supply chain. So this is the part of our shared services which partners with the business supply chain. So it covers everything from logistics, managing of customs, property management, paying of suppliers, and the sourcing of products and services. So what I'm going to do is just set the context around this particular case study. So this was a project that I've been heavily involved in as transformation communication leader over the past year or so. And this is for the team within shared services that that supports and delivers indirect sourcing. So in GE and many other businesses, we make a split between direct sourcing, which is the stuff that ends up in a product, and indirect sourcing, which is basically everything else. So this covers, and I've just picked out a few of the main categories you can see on the screen, everything from negotiating with marketing agencies, PR agencies, management consultancies, negotiating with Dell for computers, Microsoft for software, right through to negotiating with hotel chains and airlines to negotiate rates when GE employees travel. The total spend that this team looks after is around $16 billion a year. And it's a team of around 700, 750 people. And to give you a sense of how important this team is to GE, over the past 8 months, they've delivered savings of over $700 million. So in terms of their ability to help GE reduce its costs and therefore maintain a competitive position in the marketplace, this team is vital. However, the challenge we faced was to transform this team. And Dennis is right, you hear the word transformation an awful lot. And sometimes when you hear the word transformation, you discover actually it's, oh, we reorganized something, or we implemented a new tool. Oftentimes you see inflation of terms, and so we become ever grander in our descriptions. But I want to argue that this actually was a true transformation. We changed pretty much everything. And at the heart of it was a change in structure, and the ways of working that go with it. That in GE terms, we talked about moving from vertical to horizontal. So let me explain what that means. So on the left-hand side, you could see the old model. And how this worked was each of those operating businesses I touched on earlier, aviation, healthcare, transportation, had their own sourcing team, understanding what the business needed, going to the market to negotiate, and doing so with their own tools and processes. And it was a very fragmented model, and it wasn't delivering value for money. Clearly, if you can go to a supplier and say, I want 300,000 of your computers, whatever it is, you're in a much more powerful position than saying, I want 10,000. So the model we moved to was a horizontal model. And what that meant was bringing all of those teams together, introducing new, consistent, simpler, and in many cases digital tools for the team to use to improve efficiency. Going to the supplier base as one GE, presenting one face to the market. And then having teams within that one team who were then partnering with each individual business. So that shift from vertical to horizontal, I think makes sense from it makes a lot of sense from I'm not a sourcing professional, but to me this makes sense. You're much more able to leverage the scale and your buying power if you go as one team. What this meant in practice was enormous change. So the new organisation structure that I've described, it meant lots of roles being redefined, so many more experts and fewer generalists. So we ended up hosting around 1/3 of the organisation. So 1/3 of that team needed to apply for a new job. We introduced a whole bunch of new processes and tools. So we had 2 core value streams, proactive and reactive sourcing. I'm not going to go into the detail. If you're a sourcing professional, you want to ask me about it, we can do that later. But it was really about changing fundamentally the core of what people did. We introduced new tools, new analytics to help the team identify where they were savings, demonstrate usage, and so on. And we introduced a new workflow tool, the ROC tool, which I'll talk a little bit about later. We changed around 40 work locations. We drove a much more collaborative culture to enable this horizontal working to happen. And we did all of this in a matrixed organisation, employees in 50 countries, and Works Council consultation requirements across Europe to manage through. So another way of putting this is that actually we needed to change the wheels while keeping the show on the road. This photo isn't actually photoshopped, it's actually a real thing. But this is at times what it felt like. So I said at the beginning, this team needed to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars of savings, while a third of them not knowing if they had a job, while being trained in new processes, while being reorganized. So this was, I think this is what it felt like for some of them. So what do we do? And I'm going to talk about this in three ways. I'm going to talk about the definition of the change journey, how we implemented it, and then how we measured it. So in terms of definitions, so we spent a lot of time up front thinking through actually what's the journey that we need to take people on. And we ended up thinking about this in two ways. We on one hand was the business outcomes. What's the value that this is supposed to deliver? Often we end up getting so focused on the program plan, have we ticked all the boxes, are we hitting the milestones? And we forget to say, actually, what's the point of this? What's the outcome that we're supposed to deliver? So that was the business outcomes piece. And then the second half was the change management journey. How do we take people through the process? So in terms of business outcomes, we had three golden rules that everything we did needed to roll back up to. So one was this leveraging scale, presenting one face to the market, which I've talked about earlier. The second was integrated tools and processes. Let's work as one team, let's work efficiently. And then the third piece was what in GE we ended up calling deployment excellence, which I had no idea what that meant. But let me give you an example from home. I have just switched my energy supplier so that my electricity is now, I searched the market and I found the best deal for energy supply for my house. So I was congratulating myself on this very clever piece of market research and sourcing. But what I discovered was that my electricity bill actually hadn't gone down. The reason was my kids leave all the lights on, they leave their laptops plugged in, they leave the television on. And so I wasn't actually using any less electricity. And so to go back to GE, the deployment piece is saying we can have a fantastic team that negotiates great deals, appoints preferred suppliers with agreed rates, but if the businesses don't use those suppliers, we're not actually saving any money. And so the deployment piece is all about saying how do you take those great deals and ensure that they get deployed and used within the businesses. So those were our three golden rules. And then below on the left, you can see some of the things that therefore we needed to achieve. So we needed to migrate people out of the operating businesses into this one shared services team. We need to standardize processes. So we had 8 businesses. They're all doing things slightly differently. We needed to bring those to one. We needed to transform the organization in the way I've described earlier. We needed to develop and implement new tools and analytics. And then we needed to get this new way of working, this collaborative one-team style embedded in the organization. So that was in terms of defining what's the outcome that we're working towards. The second piece was explicitly to plan the change management journey. And there are lots of different frameworks. This is one that you may well be familiar with. But we mapped out, okay, how do we move people through this journey from awareness? How do we shift them from, this sounds terrible, I may not have a job, I'm happy where I was, to a place where they're actually understand, buy in, looking forward to it, learn the new skills, and actually make the model work. So in terms of what we did, in terms of business outcomes, We did lots of benchmarking, as you probably expect, both in terms of what does world-class look like, what are other people doing, what's possible. We worked with stakeholders in the businesses to secure their buy-in and endorsement of what we were doing. We developed tools. But the most important one on this page I'd just like to pause on is this process design team, the how team. So what we did was appoint around 25 sort of mid-level, high-potential leaders from across the organisation, and they worked to design and validate and test the processes that we were looking to implement. We brought them inside into the project team. They spent times working dedicated full-time on the project. Then they went back to their day jobs periodically, and we worked through using them that way. And it was incredibly powerful because it enabled you to understand the realities of the job through their direct input. And it also, we didn't ask them explicitly to do this, but they went back and they championed what we were doing to their business, their colleagues in their teams. And it was an incredibly powerful way of actually creating some momentum inside the organisation. In terms of change management, we developed a communication strategy. This would include all the things that you would expect, so a detailed stakeholder analysis, a detailed specification of what's the behavioural and attitudinal outcomes that we were trying to achieve, a communication plan, channels, a calendar, all those good things. We also developed the learning modules to enable people to adopt these new ways of working. So we ended up with 11 modules, some of which were on-demand training, some of which were delivered live by members of the How team. We also put a huge amount of effort into measuring and listening. And I'm going to talk more about these in a moment in terms of our listening post process, which was about qualitative feedback, a pulse survey to get quantitative feedback, and then usage tracking to understand the extent to which people were actually adopting the new ways of working and using the tools. So in terms of measurement, so we had soft and hard metrics, and we used the change management framework you can see across the top in terms of awareness through to reinforcement, and we mapped, okay, what are we expecting at each stage of that journey and how do we measure it? And we used that as the framework to actually measure the progress that we were making. And so on the screen you can just see a few examples. So every 30 days we had a 10-question pulse survey, took less than 5 minutes, and top right you can see just a snapshot of one of the questions. So this one was around the extent to which immediate managers were supporting the team in embracing new ways of working. Bottom left is the listening post process. This was incredibly powerful and a useful tool. So basically, we randomly selected a cross-section of employees. We divided them up among the members of the leadership team, who then phoned them up and had an open conversation using these sorts of prompt questions to understand what's going on. Are they really buying in? How do we understand the results from our pulse survey? And this was incredibly useful for two reasons. One, because it helped you flesh out what the numbers were telling you. And secondly, it enabled the leadership team to hear directly from employees right around the organisation as to what was actually going on. So it was a very powerful technique. Bottom right, you can see some of the usage data. So we created a workflow tool to manage cases and handoffs between members of the sourcing team. And what we tracked was not just, are people using this tool rather than sending someone an email, because it was all supposed to go through the tool. But secondly, is the tool working as expected? So the intention was cases will be raised and then they will be closed within the timescale specified. And what this told us was, is that happening? And you won't be able to read the detail. Well, the answer is no, it wasn't. So we had some learning and some adjusting to do as we went. One thing that ran through all of this was creating collaboration. How do we shift the culture? And as I was thinking about, okay, what actually worked, I kind of boiled it down into 4 things. So the first thing that we did was create watering holes. We created places where people knew where they needed to go. And we basically boiled it down to 2. So if you were in this organisation and you needed something, you only needed to remember 2 things. We had a dedicated Yammer page and we had an intranet portal. Those were the 2 places. And we kept reinforcing and reminding that that's where information was, that's where you needed to go. The lesson we learned is unless you keep the watering hole topped up with water, it doesn't work. So the piece that we actually were a bit slow to realise is, it's one thing to tell people, go to the watering hole. The other thing that's really important is tell people if you've got information, if you've got updates, if you need help, put it in these, keep the watering hole topped up. So watering holes was one. The second thing is we caught people doing the right thing and we celebrated success. So we had the sourcing rock stars, so every quarter we recognised people for collaborating, for embracing new ways of working. Third thing we did was creating a shared operating rhythm. Everything from, if there were going to be all hands calls, when were they going to happen, if there were particular key dates of reporting data for whatever it may be, everyone worked to the same calendar. And then the final thing we did was create a portal for shared metrics. So there was one scoreboard, one source of truth. This is what everybody was referred to when it came to what savings you delivered, whatever it might be. And the lesson we learned was that if you want people to be part of one team, then they all have to know what the score is. And this portal was the mechanism of keeping everyone focused on the same result. So what did we learn from this? I think 3 key things really. So one is the importance of engaging people and taking them through the process. So I think the first line is a quote, but I don't know where from. If you want to run fast, run alone. If you want to run far, run together. And we actually learned that sometimes it makes sense to go slow in order to go fast in the long term. The second thing is to understand before you start, where is it that you're trying to get to? I've seen this a lot in not just this project, but others, where people, they start off with an abstract term. We want to be more collaborative, we want to be more customer focused, but they never actually define what exactly do you mean? How will you know when you've delivered it? And we spend a lot of time, as I said earlier, defining the journey and the destination. And then the final piece is to both measure and manage hard and soft. So measure the hard things around usage, around defining processes, around posting jobs, but also the soft around culture and collaboration. But the final thing I'm going to end on is, this was a quote from one of the listening posts interviews that we carried out, and it really resonated with me. Over the course of yesterday, we heard a lot about what technology can do for us, how it can drive collaboration, how it can make organisational life more efficient. But I think one of the things we need to always bear in mind is that humans are brilliant at networking and connecting and talking to each other. And the challenge, I think, for all of us is we tend to look for structure, tend to try to make things formal and have a system for everything, when sometimes actually all we need to do is enable people to talk to each other. And that's how true collaboration goes, I think. So the intention of this was just to give you a short overview the transformation that we did in GE. I've tried to draw out some of the key learnings and share some of the approach in the hope that there'll be some lessons there that you can take and apply in your own work environments. So with that, I'm going to end, and if there are any questions, ask away.